Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the meeting of the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee. It's Thursday, the 22nd of September. Obviously, it's been quite some time since we've had a meeting due to the pandemic, which obviously hasn't gone away, but this is the new format of meeting. So I'd like to welcome everybody. We have had a few housekeeping issues, so it's just around making sure that if you're not speaking that your microphones are mute, and then just try to indicate to me whether you want to speak after a presentation, or and then I can actually make sure I bring you in then at that point. If we do get a lot at one time, just try and bear with us, and I'll try and make a list and we'll work through it that way. Okay, so the first item is appointment of vice chairman. I'd like to nominate Councillor Ruba Sivignan to be vice chair for this committee.
I'll second that.
So do we have any other nominations? No? Okay, thank you very much. Ruba, congratulations, you're vice chair of Environment and Regeneration. I'll move on to the second item, which is apologies for absence. I think everybody's actually here, but do we have any apologies?
No, that's correct, Chair. Everyone's here, so no apologies.
Everybody's here. Okay, that's great. I'll move to item number 3 then, which are the minutes of the last meeting, which was 25th of February, obviously quite some time ago. And I think the whole world's a different place to what it was then. But I'd like to move those minutes if everybody's happy to accept them as they are. In the pages.
Second. Yeah,
second, lovely, thank you. Item number 4 then, which is to receive declarations of interest, including whipping declarations. Do we have any? No? That's great, thank you very much. Right, the first item on the agenda then is a presentation, which is working towards recovery. Gareth's put it up on screen there. I think Miles is going to start it off, and I think other officers are going to come in. Obviously, this is a presentation around how we've managed to sort of keep things going, what the council's actually done throughout the pandemic, through the lockdown, and obviously the recovery. And I'm not sure whether they're going to give any sort of update, because obviously things have changed again today. But I'm not sure what they can actually say at the moment, because obviously it's a moving picture. So, Miles, I'd like to hand over to you to start our presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay. Thank you for the opportunity. Essentially, this report gives you details of what we've been doing since March in terms of our response to the pandemic. If we can move on to the first slide, please, Gareth. Essentially, we've treated this pandemic like a disaster, which is clearly what it is. So in terms of major disasters, you have a response phase, you have a transition phase where you're working through the details of the initial emergency, and then you hope to recover, to a position that you were at previously. In our case, we've moved from response, that was the initial phase in March. The transition we're still in. The transition phase sees us bringing certain things back into play. For example, in the response phase, we closed some of our car parks, we closed our country parks, and we had the vehicle driving around, as you probably remember, the Talai vehicle. We've moved away from that initial phase, now we're in transition. The problem we've got with this, it can work in both ways. So essentially, we could go back into response at any time. And what has happened in some of the neighbouring authorities is that's exactly what they go into now. Essentially, our most recent figure per 100,000 population is 22.5 infections. To give you a perspective, RCT went on 124 today, and our colleagues in other areas are not quite as great as that, but they're in the 50s, 60s, and they're just over 100. We've had a letter from Welsh Government, us and Cardiff, because we've been over 20 days for over a 3-day period. And the letter asks us what we're doing to contain the virus. So you'll see a lot more comms coming out, a lot more officers on the street, trying to reinforce the message. Essentially, we don't want to go into the situation of our neighbours, but it's a very difficult situation to control. So we are in a position where we're not at the moment going to go into that lockdown, second lockdown, but we do need to put all our efforts with our public to get the message of keeping themselves at social distance and also keeping their hands clean and those sort of messages. So this is essentially the process that we would use for disasters. So we've used this for the pandemic. So we'll go on to the next slide, please. In terms of our response, what you've got there is the headings that we used to concentrate our efforts. So in March, when lots of people were effectively asked to work from home, there were certain things that we had to continue. And what we've done is we made a little prioritised list there of the services we maintained during the period. The first thing clearly was to maintain services for our most vulnerable, which we've managed to do. So we had the hubs running successfully, and we dealt with food packages, and we looked after our social care people. So that was our highest priority at that point. We retained our services that were frontline as best we could. Parks may not seem that important, and cutting grass and the like, but it is important for the people when the lockdown eventually ended. So we managed to maintain that service, and we also ensured services like refuse collection and recycling were maintained. So I'm not going to name names, but some of our other councils weren't able to maintain their services as we have. And it's a testament to our staff, I think, that we've done that. And just to give you a bit of an indication of how well we performed, I don't want to steal Emma's thunder for later, but in the middle of a pandemic, we managed to return a recycling performance of 70%, a testament to our staff and our residents. That was the first quarter of this year. So leading on to that, then we had to support our staff in those efforts. So we were very keen to have people working from home. We provided them with laptops, we provided them with their own office chairs, and we enabled them to work flexibly. So we didn't really care whether they worked on a Saturday or on a Sunday, or when working in the evening, if they had childcare commitments, provided they undertook their work. And there's been a great deal of learning in terms of that from a manager's perspective, because we've seen some really good performance from our staff whilst working from home, and also our sickness levels have reduced considerably. One of the reasons for that is some of the ways that our staff have been considered and actually praised by the general public, and refuse and recycling crews in particular. They were going out to work in the morning with a skip in their step because of the support they were provided. So we also supported our partners during this. So we worked closely with our partners, as we still are, in particular the health boards and the police. Marcus' team did a hell of a lot of work on ensuring businesses were still sustainable, and issued millions of pounds worth of grants over a very short period. And we kept the council running as best we could. We had an emergency powers process for decisions, which we published so they were publicly available. And we tried to keep people informed of what we were doing. So we can move on to the next slide, please, Gareth. So in terms of decision making, these are some of the things that we did. As I said, we introduced heavy use of the emergency powers process and made sure that they were up on the council's website. We think that we regularly communicated sufficiently with elected members. You will be the judge of that. I do miss the scrutiny committees, and I know a lot of officers did, because it was a good chance to have a good debate on matters, and we lost that ability, which was difficult for us. And we started to have the virtual cabinets and now this virtual scrutiny committee. So these will continue like this until we can get together. And then we had the first report in March, which detailed what we were doing over the pandemic. And yesterday there was a report to Cabinet which dealt with our strategy in terms of response. So also at the bottom of that slide there, you've got the goal command structure. So we essentially took decisions similar as we would do in a disaster or any other form of emergency. And the goal command team that was headed by the managing director, leader and deputy leader took decisions on a daily basis. So initially at the response phase, we met every single day, and that was 7 days a week. And then we released that to 3, and now we're meeting once a week. But as I say, this process is linear. We can step this back up should we need to. And we're all ready for that if it does become an eventuality. So on to the next slide, please, Gareth. So we conducted a learning session with our staff over the summer, and we asked these questions of them, because our idea in recovery is moving to a position that was better than the previous position. So, for example, if we're able to work with 50% staff, less staff in our offices, then why don't we try and work like that and look to free off some of our office space and essentially work more efficiently. So we asked questions around what they thought had worked well, what they thought hadn't worked particularly well, what have we stopped, have people noticed that we've stopped it, what have we learned, how is staff morale and well-being, which is a key issue for us, and what demands and issues are emerging. What I'll take you through after my colleagues have spoken is some of the results from the staff survey we did, because one of the things that was very important for us, not seeing our staff, is their well-being whilst they're at home working, because they didn't have the normal day-to-day interactions they were having previously. So we conducted quite a significant survey of our staff, of your staff essentially, and some really good feedback from that. So we're trying to become a better organisation from essentially a really bad position, which we have some really good learning. I'll give you an example. You may not think it's working brilliantly, but we're assessing the performance with residents now, but we brought in booking appointments for the household waste recycling centres to avoid the queues and the loading of those areas because of our wish to maintain social distancing. And other than the fact we had a high demand the first few weeks, it's worked really well. We've now released the slots, so you can book more than one slot a month, and we're asking the public, are they happy for us to continue in that way? So there's a few other services that we've changed, and we may keep that change for the future because it's for the better. So that just gives you an example of some of the things that we've actually changed and learned from. So I think at this point, Gareth, if you're happy, I'll ask my colleagues to come in and take you through some of the learning in their specific areas. So I don't know who wants to go first, Emma or
Emma Breeze, I think. Emma could go first.
Okay. If that's okay with you, Chair.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So I've just listed up here for your information some of the actions that happened in neighbourhood services and transport. What I would say, and Miles has said this quite clearly earlier, is that from the outset, my staff have been fantastic, and a lot of the services that we have delivered have been continuation of services. There are very few things that we actually haven't been able to deliver during the pandemic. So if I start at the top there with waste management, Miles has already mentioned, but collections have continued throughout the pandemic. And we did have to suspend for a very short time green waste, but that was just to get us on our feet with recycling, compost and domestic waste to be picked up. We lifted black bag restrictions as there was a recognition that more people were at home, and there were also some concerns around things that weren't recyclable that there might be more of that needed to be disposed of properly, such as tissues and wipes and things like that. So that black bag restriction was lifted from 2 to a maximum of 4, and we do stress the maximum of 4. Obviously we want people to try and stay to 2, but there is that option for residents to use 4 whilst the pandemic is ongoing. As Miles has already mentioned, one of the main successes was the implementation of a booking scheme, an appointment scheme for the HWRCs. It is working really well at Barry and Landell. There are lots of spaces available. And for me, people have to actually think about what they want to dispose. And there's been a lot more use of third-party sites to try and recycle and reuse items before they end up at the tip, because you've actually got to physically book that appointment, and so you think about, do I need that appointment, or can I actually sell this on a site? So I think from the waste hierarchy point of view, that's been really good in that people have to think about it before they go and book the site. They don't just throw it in the car and go and deliver. So I'm really looking forward to the feedback on that scheme, and I do hope that we can keep the appointments running. In terms of our garage and our fleet management, we've continued to operate throughout. Obviously, with less people using cars and vans, there was a reduction in demand, but we changed our work processes through, and we did more service, brought some servicing forward, and did other things that we wouldn't normally have had the time, because we knew that there was going to be a demand on MOTs and servicing and everything once we got back up and running. So we basically adjusted our workload there. And the garage staff, they have been in throughout. We have had shift systems in there, and they have been working. And that's been quite challenging for them because of the issues of social distancing, particularly where they're doing a job which maybe requires 2 or 3 of them, such as changing a clutch or similar. Passenger transport, we've been right at the forefront of this in terms of school transport. We did resume limited services back in July on request when schools had the 3 weeks and a few days back in. We were at the front of that. A lot of councils didn't offer that, but we did. And we have obviously resumed school transport with clear policies, both for the parents, for the teachers and for the operators from September. And to date, that is working really well. We do have the odd incident, but we have a proper mechanism to deal with that. We're also one of the few authorities that's actually sold passes on our buses. Lots of authorities felt it was far too difficult to actually sell passes. I know, for example, in RCT, they made a decision not to sell passes. I think normally they have about 800 people that buy passes off them, and they decided not to do that. I think they're now rethinking that decision, because obviously they've had quite a bit of backlash from people about not being able to get their children onto the buses. In terms of Green Links, this is a really good example that service was initially repurposed. It's done a number of jobs, from food parcels to other jobs that have been needed. It is now back up and running. It started back on the 7th of September. We're not running normal bus services off it, but we are running ring and have a service. So that as a message there that obviously that's really good, and we're back and working. Engineering, again, we initially had a bit of a backlog of potholes and resurfacing, but I can say today, I've examined the figures today, and we're back up and fully running. As soon as we could get people on site to deal with potholes, it's obviously the ideal time in a lockdown because it's quiet. We had extra gangs out, and we've worked really well with our contractors, I think, in dealing with that. We've also got an extensive road resurfacing programme that is happening throughout the Vale, and that hasn't suffered any delays because of COVID. So I say congratulations to my staff for being able to keep those going. You'll also notice that we're on site with a number of capital projects. There was a slight delay at the start of the pandemic, but we are now back up and fully delivering on projects. And transport studies have continued throughout, and as such, we're going to consultation on a number of things now through the next couple of months. So all of that is work in progress. Car parks were a little bit of a challenge for us, and I mentioned that because obviously a lot of you will be aware we did have some incidences, in particular the incident in Ogmore by Sea in one of the car parks that we opened, and we have had challenges in terms of managing that and also managing our resorts. But what we've done is we've actually formed a really good partnership with the police, with the community, and with officers to deliver sort of a comprehensive approach to our resorts, and I think that's worked quite well. In particular, the alcohol seizures on Barry Island, the press coverage on that has been really good. So I think there's a message there about the need to have partnerships moving forward, and those partnerships are even more important when you have a pandemic. You need those people to call out and support you. Parks and cleansing. All of our parks are open. They haven't all been open through all of the pandemic, but they are now open. Our toilets were one of the first to be open across Wales, and Colin Smith did a risk assessment, and I think the rest of Wales is still using it for the toilets. So again, we were at the front of that. We took those risks. They were minimal risks, but we took them and we led the way. We also have had additional staff litter collecting. Some of those staff have been repurposed. I've had staff from our admin team. I've had staff operating from our sports teams, and they've all really pulled together and done the jobs that maybe are very different to what they do now, but they're helping out and helping that team approach. In terms of enforcement, as you know, we took over enforcement on the 1st of April, so right at the start of the pandemic. We are up and running with a civil parking enforcement and environmental enforcement team. There is a new manager who I'm sure you'll love to meet at some future point of scrutiny, Dave Mitchell. Our work there has been quite interesting because of the pandemic, because of the antisocial behaviour. There's been a lot of work with the police in terms of managing that enforcement. I'm glad to say that we took receipt of the camera car, and you may well have seen that out and about. It is issuing, it's not formal tickets at the moment, it's issuing advisory tickets, but from the 5th of October it will be issuing proper tickets. First couple of weeks, great success, really slim, slick system, and we're getting really effective around schools. So watch this space on that one. It's a really interesting project. Alps reception. We had a discussion about the Alps reception, actually, whether we needed it moving forward, because we hadn't, the main thing our reception gets used for is waste bags and people coming in to collect waste bags. We do have meetings and such like, but obviously that can be handled by a number of different ways. We have reopened the Alps reception. I would say the demand is a lot less because we've retained the waste bag delivery service. So if you want a waste bag at the moment, you can opt to get those online and we will deliver them. And we found that's taken a lot of pressure off that front desk, and those staff can then be used for other purposes. For example, one of those staff who's normally in the reception area has been out driving the camera car this week. So there's that flexibility where you can adjust your service and use those staff for other purposes. Miles touched on this, but for me, the pandemic's all been about the move to more flexible working arrangements, being more outcome-led, and not necessarily keeping a time watch on everybody, but more about how people are delivering and what's the best way for them to deliver. We've had a continual management presence at the Alps on a rota basis and at Court Road. We've done that as a management team, and we've had a mix of staff in the office, at home, or obviously on site. Miles mentioned the workforce. That's been a big issue. Their sickness has improved dramatically, and the sickness overall has. Now, I'm not quite sure for the reasons for that, because obviously it's quite a bit of pressure, and it's been quite a bit of pressure for the workforce. I think definitely the people working at home may think twice before they ring in sick, because they haven't got to come into the office. So there's lots of things I think that we want to take forward. I haven't talked about technology there, that's probably for another day, but there's lots of technological developments that we're doing in terms of getting people to start from site and work from site. So that's, sorry, I've had more than my time, but that's all I've got to say.
Okay, thank you, Emma. I think, Marcus, are you next?
Sorry, just unmuting. Yes, that's great.
Yes, right.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, Chair. Gareth,
Marcus, shall I? I'll make a presenter and you can share your screen. Just
okay, fine. Right, okay, hang on. Where do I share it from, Gareth?
bear with me. That's how I'll do it for you, Marcus. It's just easier that way.
Okay, apologies. Brilliant. Thank you, Gareth. So I'll try and fly through this, not be too long. So we've picked up a couple of the key areas that regeneration and planning have delivered through the pandemic so far. One of the biggest areas obviously been around grant funding, and we've worked really closely with the council tax team to deliver over £27 million worth of non-domestic rates grants to businesses in the council's area. That was a no mean feat. That's a lot of money, and involved a lot of discussions with various businesses and checking accounts and making sure they qualified for them. And the regeneration team took basically the front end role in that, in speaking to businesses and ensuring that they qualified for the grants. We've had a second wave of grants, which has been delivered by the regeneration team, the business startup grants. The council was allocated just over £207,000. The grants themselves total £2,500 each. Those grants have largely been given out. I think there's still some remaining, but it's still a process that's going on. And a couple of weeks ago, we were advised that there's a new set of grants coming out, the Culture Recovery Fund for Freelancers grant, which again is a £2,500 grant, and Vale had an allocation of just over 317,000. That grant package launches on October the 5th, and there has been quite a lot of work around ensuring that we have resilience around how those grants are awarded and who gets them and that they qualify. So that process has been no mean feat, I have to say. The guys have worked really, really hard right throughout the evening in some cases to make sure these grants have got out. And I think both the council tax team in regard to the £27 million that went out, and the regeneration team as well, and also the regeneration team in terms of the other grants, do deserve a lot of congratulations in terms of how they've managed to get those funds out so quickly. Alongside that, we've also had the Vale Heroes Crisis Fund, which colleagues from creative rural communities became involved in. There were in total 23 projects awarded a total of just over £48,000. That was very much aimed at supporting community projects which had been impacted by the pandemic, and the sort of projects that got funding there included a scheme where local residents were making scrubs for the hospitals, and they received funding for that. There were a number of other projects which received funding, so those were a very worthy scheme. Do you want to move on, Gareth? Thank you. Obviously, some of the other areas mirror with what Emma's team's been doing. We had to maintain and manage the current country parks. Initially, obviously, those country parks were closed to the public when the pandemic struck. But as time went on, obviously, the parks were reopened, and similar things to what Emma talked about with the toilets opening and ensuring that public access was safe. We did have notable levels of antisocial behaviour quite initially. That has calmed down. Obviously, it's partly to do with the weather we were having at the time, and some of those issues of antisocial behaviour we get every year, so it's not particularly different to any other year. Obviously, it's just that we had the social distancing element, which was more important. The regeneration team also were integral in supporting and sourcing PPE for the council. Clearly, one of the problems we had at the start of the pandemic was you could not get enough PPE. We didn't have enough in stock, and actually we were struggling to get hold of stock, as was every council and every nursing home, and even the NHS. So the team who had contacts in business became involved in helping source those products, and one of the team remains an integral part of the PPE team now, and is still essentially partially working in that team and ensuring that we have enough sanitizer, face masks, gloves, aprons to be able to support what we do as a council, and indeed support some of the nursing homes as well. We very early on started set up town centre resilience forums before, while retailers were still locked down and town centres were still locked down, and we helped traders get through the process of reopening. and provided support to those non-essential retail and hospitality businesses as they reopened. We continue to have those resilience forums, and we will be speaking with them, and I'll come on to that a little bit later in the presentation. We've also maintained the delivery of existing regeneration schemes and ensured that they came to fruition. And one of the key ones there is the Good Shed, and you'll, I'm sure, be aware of how the Good Shed has opened during the middle of the pandemic and has managed to open safely. I think it's a fantastic scheme, and one of the schemes which we're very proud of. Gareth, do you want to just move on? Thanks. So some other actions we focused on, we worked with Welsh Government to repurpose capital funding, support town centres. I talked about the resilience forums, and we are hoping that we can use the resilience forums to help consult on some schemes that we hope to develop around town centres. We have between 400 and 500,000 pounds earmarked to help those town centres and to be spent spent in this financial year. And we have appointed agents to draw up some initial schemes to help with that process. The agents are called Roberts Limbrick, and they come with a track record of town centre regeneration schemes and placemaking schemes. And we will be working with them and working with the communities and businesses to try and make the town centres feel safe and encourage shopping. So you can see that town centre shopping campaign as well as being commissioned. That is publicising our town centres and publicising what is being done in the local shopping centres to help support safe trading. We've worked with hospitality businesses to increase public space for seating in a safe way. That's involved working with Miles's teams to ensure that the areas are licensed properly outside of the premises, and ensure that they are seating in a proper way and that there is social distancing and what have you. And that has been an important part of everything we've done, actually, how we've worked very closely with other parts of the council. You'll see I mentioned the council tax team. We've worked very closely with Miles's and Emma's teams in neighbourhood services, and I think forged links which perhaps didn't exist before, but has meant that the council's worked extremely effectively across these various teams. And again, at the bottom, we've talked about creative rural communities and how we refocus what they've done to focus on supporting some of the more rural communities through the pandemic. Next slide, Gareth. So some of the things we're going to be looking at in the future, coming into the recovery phase, we are looking at publishing a growth plan. The growth plan was largely written, believe it or not, before the pandemic struck. So we have had to refocus what's in there to talk a little bit more about recovery and getting businesses to come back to the position they were in perhaps before the pandemic struck. But we hope to have that plan out and published in the winter, in the autumn, late autumn, winter. We continue to work with town centres to implement the capital schemes that we hope to get from Roberts Limbrick. We will be looking and administering future bids for COVID support funding from Welsh Government and National Government. You'll see we are working in conjunction with Welsh Government and UK Government to access as much support as possible so that we can facilitate as quicker economic recovery as we can. And of course, continue to develop the existing pipeline of regeneration schemes, some of which have been stalled by, obviously, the pandemic, but hopefully we can come out the other end and have good schemes to look at going forward, just like the Good Shed. Sorry, last slide, Gareth. Thanks, Gareth. So the last thing to talk about really quickly is planning. When the pandemic struck, a lot of councils initially thought that they'd get no planning applications and we should almost think of furloughing planning staff. We've actually been extremely busy, and I think the first bullet point there is amazing, really. We've had 849 applications since the 23rd of March when the lockdown was first implemented, of which 820 have been determined. That compares very much with a normal year. We've not seen a drop-off in workload at all in the planning department. Actually, if you look at fee income is in an extremely healthy position for planning. So that workload has been very, very busy. Our enforcement cases have risen. They actually rose quite considerably during the lockdown initially. I think when a lot of people were at home on furlough, and perhaps there were issues arising and they were home and they could see them. We actually at one point were something like 40% up over the number of complaints that we'd normally receive. As that's leveled out, we're still up by about 10% on the same period last year. So the enforcement team have been extremely busy. Emma's referred to the how the service has been maintained and working remotely. We have some officers who are in the office and have been coming in to ensure that things like scanning are undertaken, and that paper copies of plans, which we still receive, are turned into electronic copies. But in the main, the workforce has been working full-time from home and remotely, and doing site visits with their own vehicles. We have been using more recently some of the vehicles that we have, and Emma's team have, if you like, dedicated a number of vehicles to the planning team and the building control team, so they can use those vehicles to visit sites. But it's been an interesting process, but one which we've managed to achieve, again, by working jointly with some other departments as well. And then, of course, some of you will be aware, we've already had 2 virtual planning committees, and obviously that's an interesting process, a bit like today, but it has worked to a certain extent, and I think everyone we've held is getting better and better. So that's my presentation finished. Thank you very much, Gareth, and thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. Before I hand back over to Miles, I'm just going to quickly bring in Councillor Liz Burnett, who is Cabinet Member for Education Regeneration. So Liz, did you want to add a couple of comments as well?
I just wanted to add a little bit to what Marcus said, and I'm not going to steal any of Peter's comments, but to a certain extent what has come out of neighbourhood services and transport. I don't think that we can overstate the contribution of our staff during this period. One of the, if there is a benefit to working 7 days a week and having gold meetings every day, it's that you get a much more in-depth overview of every team, not just your own. And what was stunning was the way in which the teams worked together, the total can-do attitude, the way in which they repurposed their efforts and actually stepped up and filled in whatever gap the pandemic created. Marcus mentioned PPE. I mean, Adrienne just walked straight away from the job she was doing and became an expert in procuring PPE. If you went to Adrienne and she had a spreadsheet on everything, what you could buy, where from, at what cost per unit, and that was within a couple of weeks. And she was part of a team. I know Adrienne because she works in the Regen team. There was a whole team that was formed purely to deliver that sort of work. One line on Marcus's spreadsheet presentation was about giving out business grants, and we talk about 27 million. That's 27 million at either 10,000 or 25,000 each. But if I tell you that those teams, from doing nothing like that ever before, the Regen and Finance team, first of all, when it started coming out, had a web page built and populated within 24 hours of the announcement, and actually started paying out money within a week of the criteria being announced. It's that sort of level of turnaround. So what I would ask is, you've seen the presentation from both departments, have a little dig behind the background, because you will hear some stunning performances and some really, really interesting stories. That's all I've got to say today.
Thank you, Liz. That was really helpful addition, and I think it's very true about the fact that the amount of background work that's going on and the dedication from our staff I think has been absolutely fantastic, and an accolade to to all our staff at the council. I'm going to hand back over to Miles now. I think, Miles, then you're going to bring this or wrap this up, or carry on with it and then wrap it up. And then after that, I'm just going to briefly bring in then is Councillor Peter King, who is the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood Services and Transport. So, Miles, I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got another 15 slides. I'll try and fly through these. I'm not a firm believer in PowerPoint going longer than about 10 slides, so I'll do my best. I just wanted to add to the thing that my colleague said there, just about the joint working. I think I need to say it. We issued 38 cafe pavement licenses in 2 weeks. When we heard that they could trade outside and not inside, and we hadn't issued that many before in about 5 years. So this is a new chap we got working for us. I never will name drop him because he's been excellent. The guy called Leighton who's working in our highways team, and that just represents the can-do attitude. I think he's a new employee, and he's been absolutely excellent along with a lot of others. So I thought I just would drop that in. Okay, these next few slides are about our staff. So essentially about how we believe we've taken the staff with us in terms of the changes we've made. We conducted a survey, and we conducted a survey on those headings you see there. So we asked them questions around those headings. We just go to the next slide, please, Gareth. The majority of people that we had responded were working from home, so 70%. But we had a good cross section. Over 1,000 people asked. And you'll see there, over half of them thought that it'd be better to have a mix of working from home and working from the office in future. Generally, the responses were really positive and better than I thought they would be, to be honest. So I'll take you through some of the other details now. So we go on to the next slide, please. So we asked them about how concerned they were about the virus personally, and our figures there are very similar to the Office of National Statistics. If you look, 70% somewhat worried, and ONS at 69%, and then in the next 47% good or excellent, and then 44% for the ONS. So roughly the same as what the national position was in terms of those two questions. So next slide, please, Gareth. So then we got a couple of questions about health and well-being, about staff and senior leaders. So reasonably good performance again. So we were worried about well-being, but generally it shows that the well-being of staff was fine. And in terms of leaders, which is important to us, there was significant trust as far as the employees were concerned, in terms of the leaders protecting them, which is something that we, as leaders, we're really pleased about. We've maintained that connection. So next slide, please, Gareth. So communication is obviously how you can judge a good organisation by how well it communicates. So we generally had positive comments about the way that the MD in particular communicated. He sends weekly updates, and even more frequently if something happens out of the ordinary. And in those updates, he was making sure he was praising specific groups of staff who had done over and above for that week. And I know because a lot of the staff were in our teams that it was really well respected by them. And it was a major lift to staff morale. So if we go to the next slide, please, Gareth. So we asked questions around line management, and these were generally highly positive, with 90% of respondents feeling trusted to do their work, which is really, really keen for us, and 83% feeling that their managers care for their health and well-being. These sort of figures, we would expect them to be as high, but I think this shows that the council has a good culture. So when you go into a situation where you're challenged in a crisis, your staff respond in a certain way because you put the work in beforehand. I'd like to think that that's the case. So next slide, please, Gareth. So now, as I say, we're still in transition, very much so, and we could dip back into response because you've all seen the headlines today. And things like the control of the sale of alcohol and things like that are happening nationally. So there's major challenges ahead for us. I've explained that the first one for us is to get the message over to the public of how serious this is. So in terms of our transition, we had a series of objectives. I gave you the initial objectives for the recovery phase. So these are them then in bold. So manage and mitigate the risks. So to give you an idea of one of the things we did in transition, just to give an indication, originally we were only having 2 people in a cab of a refuse vehicle, and we were following behind the refuse vehicle with a pool car, with one of the loaders in a pool car. So we worked with the unions to look at that service and see whether it could be improved. And now we've got 3 vehicles back in the cab. It's a bit of a contentious item nationally, because there's a lot of councils doing things differently. But we've got a risk assessment that suggests that we put reasonable controls in place to change what we're doing to keep our staff safe. Importantly for us, the staff are happy with those arrangements. So this is a continual assessment of the risks as we go through. We continue with our response objectives, which I've gone through previously. And we consider how the changes introduced in the crisis response offer opportunities. So one of the things I have said is we're learning from some of these things. We're learning in areas such as things like housing management, in the support we provide to our housing tenants. In some areas, they haven't needed the level of support that we provided them over a long term. And in some cases, a little bit more self-service is actually what they wanted. And we haven't realised that until some of these services have been partially withdrawn. So some areas may be overstaffed, some areas may be understaffed. So these are the sort of lessons that we're picking up as we go along. Continuing to support the wellbeing of our staff is clearly a really important point. And again, we've been telling the staff that the national message is to work from home if possible, and we very much support that. We're not forcing anyone to come to work. There are certain roles, and in our directorate we've got a lot of frontline staff, and they don't have any other opportunity than to work on the front line, and in which case it's our role to make sure they're safe, and we are very committed to that, and continue to communicate and engage with our residents and with the staff and with our partners. So next slide, please, Gareth. So in terms of managing the transition, we set up directorate recovery teams. So I've got one that I deal with, my own management team, and each of the directors have got the same. And we've also got corporate recovery teams that look at those services that essentially are across all directorates. And I've listed those there. So things like workplace social distancing, that's something that's been led by Lauren Cross's team. And all our offices now, if you've been there, you'll see there's marks on the floor, there's ample signage, there's a large number of gel stations. If you come to the Alps, we've got the numbers of staff that are able to occupy each office on the doors. And we all wear masks in the communal areas. And this is something that's been done as a corporate recovery team, not directorate wide. So we make sure that we've got all the learning that we need to have across all directorates. So onto the next slide, please, Gareth. So in terms of recovery, when in a disaster, when you actually are in a transition phase, you're always thinking about recovery. So in terms of the principles, as I said to you previously, this is not a previous state. If you'd had a disaster, you'd be looking to revert back to the previous state. This is not what we're looking for. We're looking to come out of this as a better organisation, a leaner, more efficient organisation. I don't need to tell you that we are one of the best councils out there. We were before and we will be afterwards. One of the things we have done, I believe in this, is shown really good leadership. I think Emma mentioned earlier about public conveniences. Sounds like a small matter, but unless we'd opened our public conveniences in the Vale and provided the Welsh Local Government Association with our comprehensive risk assessment, I doubt if many others would have done the same. So, and we've done that with consistently with quite a few of our areas. So in some cases being the first to close, in other cases being the first to open also. So I think in terms of our leadership, and I know that our MD has been leading on the strategic control group as chair of the recovery group for the whole of South East Wales. We're well respected with what we've done to date. Still a lot of uncertainty, as we've said. You know, that we still don't know what we're going into and how long this is going to last. But we've got a lot of good staff working here, and we're able to plan as effectively as we can based on the evidence that we have. So in terms of our recovery themes, we've given them themes based on the high risk areas, and also they cross-cut with the new corporate plan, which was brought in on April the 1st this year. So these are the headings of our high level themes. As I say, they're cross-cutting, and what you'll see when I present later the annual improvement plan is that they actually go across the council, these recovery themes. They're not just based on any specific service department. So onto the next slide, please, Gareth. And what we've tried to show you there is a table that shows how they fit in with the new corporate plan. So you've got 4 objectives, wellbeing objectives, a new corporate plan, and essentially that all the headings I just gave you are hung under the 3 right-hand boxes there, with the 1 shaded in being a common theme across all of those headings. So work with and for our community is common across all the headings we've just given you. So this ties in exactly with the corporate plan. And the next slide then, we reported to Cabinet yesterday on our strategy. So the strategy shows for each wellbeing objective a reminder of what we want to achieve by that objective, relevant recovery themes that link to the objective, the threats and opportunities. Anyone that's ever done anything in terms of management will know that there's certain tools you use to actually make improvements, and the strategic actions that will be undertaken. And that was all in the report that went to Cabinet yesterday. So what you'll see now in future meetings of this Scrutiny Committee and others is we'll take you through our transition to recovery phases as we develop this further. So in terms of the next steps, which is the next slide, CMT goal continues to meet. We meet weekly now, but this can be ramped up at any time. The recovery strategy was reported to Cabinet, as I said, and we've now been given a task as directorates of actually putting together our recovery plans on a set format, and then these will feed into the annual delivery plan, which will encapsulate all the recovery actions. It's not going to be the same as it was before, and some of the things we planned to do April the 1st we're not going to be able to, but we'll do our best to achieve what we can based on the situation that we're currently in. Okay, and that, I think, Chair, concludes the presentation. So thank you for bearing with me over that very large number of slides.
Okay, thanks, Miles. Really informative presentation. I think it's, we've had regular updates as councillors from the Chief Executive right throughout the situation. But I think to actually have this presentation, I think is really useful. So I would just like to bring in briefly Councillor Peter King. So he just wants to speak as Cabinet member, and I've got a couple of councillors and who've indicated to speak. So Councillor King, over to you.
Thanks ever so much. It's only a brief comment really, and I want to take us back to the early days in the response phase, because we're trying to cover 6 months tonight. And frankly, without the opportunity of scrutiny, I've not had the chance to pay the tribute that I would like to pay to the managers, supervisors, and especially the frontline staff, because I was completely humbled and very humbled by and very proud of the way that they worked in those early days, and particularly I think over things like waste and recycling. I think if you were a resident, you probably didn't have any impediment whatsoever, with the possible exception of garden waste, because we came up to Easter and everyone seemed to be locked down and doing their gardening. But certainly in terms of food and recycling and waste, we just maintained the service brilliantly. And I'd also like to pay tribute to the residents, because whilst we acknowledged that lockdown was going to cause difficulties, and we encouraged them, we allowed them to go up to 4 bags per fortnight, and a lot have done that. The waste figures have increased, so has the recycling. And Miles has already commented how good our percentages are, which was something that neither he, Colin, nor I expected. So it's really just to say a most sincere thanks, and that's not to overlook anybody else, but there is a danger that it will be forgotten, because that worked right so long ago, and we seem to have come so very, very far since. So please note my thanks and appreciation.
Okay, thank you, Councillor King. I've got a couple of councillors now who've indicated to speak. I'm going to bring in, I've got Councillor Liz, I'm not sure if it's Driscoll or Bailey. It came through on the message, but I'm not sure which one.
Both. I think it's both of us.
Oh, both of you, right. So which one of you wants to go first?
Go on, Vince, you go first.
Which Vince? No, I'm joking, sorry. Okay, I've got 2 questions, if I may. Thanks for the presentation, and agreed that there's been loads of amazing examples of hard work by staff. It must have been really, really difficult to cope with the changes that we've all had to face. The 2 questions I wanted to ask, one relates to digital meetings. So we all saw yesterday's meeting and the week before. It was quite shambolic. There was real issues with connection, audio dropping out. There's a limit to how many people's faces can be on screen at any one time. There were councillors complaining that they had to vote when they couldn't hear the whole debate, wouldn't have been aware of what the amendments were, and that isn't really very good, especially when there's other platforms. I know Parliament and Welsh Government have both been perfectly happy to use Zoom. You can fit more than 100 people on screen on camera. You can mute them as an organizer. You can have polling functions that make it easy to do voting quite seamlessly. And yet we're using this system that, okay, it's working okay today with a small number of people, but it was pretty dreadful. And to have to be, you know, voting when there's a lot of amendments being put forward and people can't necessarily stay on top of them, I think that's pretty unacceptable. And I'm not blaming anyone on this meeting, but I do think that we've had a lot longer. We've had months and months and months. We waited a long time to get meetings started. We didn't do anything for several months. And I think we've had quite a long time to get this right. And it's a shame that we haven't tested better systems. So I wouldn't mind hearing why this platform's been the one that's chosen. If anyone wants to answer that. Should I ask the other question first, or should I wait for a response on these, Bronwyn?
Ask your other question as well. I mean, we're very limited what we can respond to that question. And really, I was looking for questions around about the presentation.
Well, it was in the presentation. It was in the presentation, Chair. It was mentioned. There's been a lot of positive feedback, and I accept that. A lot of great work's been done, but you have to be able to respond when when you have personal experience. Everyone in this room knows how those meetings have gone, so I think it was a perfectly valid question. The other one is a positive also. It's great to see that there are fewer staff members calling in sick, and that most people are happy and adapting to working from home. It can be really challenging. The question I wanted to ask was if there's steps being put in place just to make sure that particularly people who might be living alone and maybe younger people as well, perhaps, who might feel isolated by not having that daily contact, really. And I know I've just seen the leader's response to my first question about people having multiple devices open in the same room. I did notice that the leader and Councillor Ammore were both in the same room as well, so I think that might have been an issue too.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bailey. Who would like to ask? Gareth, did you want to give a quick update? Because I know there are moves around what will be in the future around online and remote meetings. Did you want to give a quick update around that?
Well, yes, Councillor Chairman. Going back to what Councillor Bailey was saying, I appreciate his comments that obviously no system is perfect. I think we did test every system out there. There were ICT issues that probably I can't really explain the details of what the issues were, but there were limitations to the available infrastructure. This is the system that came out to be the best. We tested this repeatedly over months, but you know, in the long run, we will be looking to use Teams, so that's the solution that's in the pipeline. There are obviously issues. Everybody's got their own connectivity issues. We're all using personal Wi-Fi's. There could be issues there. I mean, no system's perfect. I appreciate the comments, but there's not much more I can add to that, sorry, Bailey. So perhaps I could go back to Head of Democratic and we can have a discussion at a later stage.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Burnett, did you want to just come in around that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the first thing is that it might be an idea to give advance notice to Corporate Performance and Resources tomorrow, because that's probably the correct scrutiny committee to raise that. What I would say for anybody that is on Learning and Culture, where we actually discussed the issues around enabling thousands of children to get online so that they could continue their learning. We also discussed the fact that we have thousands of staff who had to get online. And so, you know, it's a question of whether or not you put the resources initially into making sure services continue to run, making sure children are able to access learning from at home whilst testing out some of these machines and some of these platforms. Also, members will know that machines had to be brought in for update. Some members hadn't actually been on their machines for quite a long time, so therefore hadn't had the online updates that had been provided. But I think that it might be worth members letting Democratic Services know in advance that that is a question that they would like to be discussed tomorrow, and then that can be fully answered. But, you know, as I said, tonight we have 21 people on this meeting and hardly a glitch. We had an awful lot of issues around people, you know, with 2 devices and various other things last night. Hopefully we're all a little bit more skilled for the next time, which we get to do in just a couple of weeks, don't we?
Okay, I'm just going to bring in the leader, Councillor Neil Moore. Neil, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just need to rebut the comment that was made, because you're absolutely right. We had 2 devices working, but and the reason for that was to prove who was online. But I disabled, and I told you all this, I disabled the microphone, I disabled the speakers on one of them, and we weren't having feedback. There were feedback, as I understand, because I found out today, some feedback from other members who were also on mobile phones and devices at the same time. And there were possibly some people in the same room, I think that was the case, with microphones on both devices, and that's what gives the feedback. So with all due respect, don't throw accusations out when you don't know what's happened. I told you last night I actually stopped the meeting and said, look, I will disable things here to make sure it isn't this, and I know it wasn't. So with all due respect, I needed to rebut that. Thank you.
Chair, can I just apologise if that was misunderstood what I was saying? What I misunderstood was that by having people in the same room, 2 devices would have affected connectivity, not just the sound. I appreciate what you're saying, but there were other issues around connectivity, people literally dropping off, and I don't think that had anything to do with that. So if you misunderstood me, I didn't mean to throw any accusations that you caused the connectivity to drop. That was what I was saying. There may have been more than 1 device in the room, but that didn't affect the fact that people were literally being thrown out.
Right. Okay. I'm going to bring that one to a close, because I think Councillor Burnett's right that is an actual issue to go into further depth with corporate resources, and perhaps we can pass that message on to them. Gareth, could you do that for us? Just about the concerns that have been raised here.
We'll take note of there, and obviously we do take these issues very seriously. So we do appreciate any feedback we receive. So thank you. Okay,
thank you. Right, the other part of your question, Vince, was around staff morale. So was it Miles? Did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, happy to answer that, Chair. A very good point, and it's one that that Emma and I know are concerned about, because we've got quite a lot of staff working from home. One of the things we have to do is retrain our supervisors that the way to manage people in the 21st century is not to stare at them across the desk, because some of them do think that if they can't see them, they can't manage them. So we've set up a workforce, agile workforce group, which is headed by the head of HR, and we're looking at a few issues with that group. We're looking at employee welfare, which is our primary concern, but also there's an issue about performance. We've got to make sure we've got measures in place that we trust our staff. We do have to make sure we're a public organisation, we have measures in place to ensure performance. So there's been a group set up to look at that specifically. So we take our employment policies into the future, essentially. Until then, the supervisors have a role to contact their staff regularly to check on their welfare. So I'm fairly confident. I've seen the figures within that report for my own directorate that they are doing that. But that is a major concern for us, that we make sure that we maintain that welfare, because as I think as Vince has pointed out, you don't see the members of staff, and they do need your support. So often it's not just a straight working from home and not going to see you a situation, that they will come in and they will conduct some meetings in the office. But it's a new situation for us, and we're trying to take our supervisors along with us as well. But we will have all these measures in place. I'm certain of that.
Okay, thank you, Miles. Right, the next councillor to speak then is Councillor Vince Driscoll. Is he with us?
Chairman.
Yeah.
Got me?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I had a couple of questions, but they seem quite trivial now, because it was about 45 minutes ago when I listened to Emma's presentation. But one of the questions was about, has there been an increase in fly tipping in the Vale since lockdown? Also, I'd like to thank you for the start of the demolition of the Brynadon Bridge, which has been, as we all know, has been quite a long saga. And also, there's one question for Marcus, actually. Well, I mean, I did ask the question at full council last night, but the connectivity at the meeting, as we've already heard, was pretty poor, and I couldn't really hear Councillor Moore's response. But it's the toilet block over Barry Island, and I'm just wondering is it time to revisit the contract that was given out to the developer? In a time, I think his contract was awarded very similarly time to the Good Sheds. In the same time, the Good Sheds has built 40 apartments, renovated the Good Sheds, and brought in 40 new businesses. And the toilet block is still in the same condition, and it's getting worse every week. And also, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the officers and the staff. What a fantastic job they've done. Incredible, difficult position, and hats off to them all. Well done. Thank you. Thank you, Bowman.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Emma, did you want to respond to a couple of those questions?
Yeah, we in terms of fly tipping, we did have an initial issue when our HWRC sites were shut, because as you know, at the start of the pandemic, obviously everybody was clearing out, and there wasn't an HWRC actually open. However, since the HWRCs have opened, there's been a steady drop off of fly tipping. Don't get me wrong, we're still getting fly tipping incidents in known spaces, but we are following those through with the new enforcement team that I mentioned earlier. So they are doing a lot more work in terms of trying to identify culprits and take them through the prosecution process. So I can't open at the moment the Q1 performance, but I would expect that to be raised and then hopefully come back in line as we move forward. Thank you for the note about the Brynadon Bridge, and I'm sure everybody across Common Bridge, I'm sure everybody's pleased to see that work done.
Thank you, Emma.
Okay, now in relation to the issue on the toilets, I understand you actually had a full response to that at the council last night, but I'm not sure if anything else that Marcus can add to that. Marcus, have you got anything else to add to that? Or Councillor Moore, did you want to come in on that one?
Sorry, if anybody wants me to reiterate what I said last night, I'm happy to do so, because the question he asked.
Yes.
But it's up to you as chair.
Yeah, I think if you could just repeat that. Obviously, sounds like Councillor Driscoll didn't quite actually catch what you said, so if you could just repeat that for him, and I'm sure he can listen this time.
I will read the answer to the question too. It says, will the council reconsider their decision to give this building to the preferred bidder? The fact that no work has been started suggests they don't have the finances in place to complete the building. Does the cabinet member agree they have been given enough time So what I said was, thank you for the 2 questions. The simple answer to your first question is no, because the preferred developer has a contract in place with the council, setting out terms for an agreement to lease and a lease agreement. In answer to your second question, I believe that as we are currently in a pandemic, it is not unexpected that there's been delays in development, although I accept this is taking a lot longer than I would have envisaged when the contracts were agreed. To that end, negotiations are currently ongoing with the developer to advance matters as soon as possible, and those negotiations continue to be fruitful.
Okay,
thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Moore. I missed most of that yesterday, so thank you very much. Thank you for that.
Okay.
My pleasure.
Okay, thank you. Right, the next councillor to speak is Councillor Leighton Rollins.
Sorry, Chair. I think Marcus Goldie would like to say something if he can.
Oh, yeah, sure. Before I bring you in, Leighton, then we'll just bring Marcus in.
Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping you can hear me now. I think I lost my speaker. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. It was just to add to what the leader has said there. A couple of other issues really. This building is a listed building, and because it is a listed building, there are quite a lot more hoops that the developer has to jump through to get their scheme and bring their scheme to fruition. So obviously they have got applications in which have been in for some time, but they have to satisfy the terms of CADU as well as the council. So it was just to add that it's quite a lot more complicated than perhaps the Good Shed would have been. The Good Shed, unbelievably, isn't a listed building. It's a very lovely building, but it isn't listed. The toilet block, which isn't really as lovely a building, is listed and does make lead to some real difficulties when developing. So just to add to that.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. Okay, Councillor Leighton Rollins, I'll bring you in now.
Thank you, Chair. My question was basically about the grant. I had a phone call today from a business in Surrey who has had great difficulty in getting his rate grant. One, he didn't know anything about it until he spoke to a neighbour of his. He's based in the Vale of Glamorgan building or business centre. So he has, he's emailed, he's phoned, not getting responses, and when he does get a response, it's, oh, we'll get back to you. So there's a few issues that I have. Why didn't the council, when going out with the business grants, have a system in place to do an auto email when applications made by businesses for the rates of the grant, saying your application has been accepted, as in it's been put in, and we'll get back to you within so many days. Many applicants had no idea that their application had been received. They didn't even get an email when it was processed. They just got a payment in some cases. I'm not saying that I wouldn't like £10,000 in my bank account, but it just makes, for businesses, it was just a stressful time waiting and not hearing from anyone whether their application had been received or even accepted. So, it's great that, Councillor Burnett was saying how brilliant, everyone was in relation to the background team and, a tap on the back and stuff. But a large number of businesses were left stressful, anxious and worried because they had literally heard nothing and still haven't heard nothing. Do you think it's good communication? That's my question.
Right, okay, thank you for that, Councillor Rollins. I will hasten to add, though, that a lot of businesses, it wasn't just £10,000 into their accounts as a cushion, it was actually for survival of their business. Married to somebody who's got more business, his business wouldn't have survived. So I would like to put that on as well.
Businesses didn't know whether they were having 10,000 or their application
I'm
put
speaking
in.
now. Okay. Councillor Burnett, did you want to answer Councillor Rollins?
Well, unless Marcus wants to.
Marcus.
Could I just come in to begin with, because I'd like to completely refute what Councillor Rollins said. Yeah. When the process started, obviously it was a process that was dumped on the council very, very quickly. I say dumped, obviously the whole situation arrived very, very quickly. The grant process literally arrived from Welsh Government overnight, and as a council we had to set up a system to deal with. So if we look at the figures, there was a combination of grants that were between 25 and 10,000 pounds. This council issued 27 million pounds worth. So you can see exactly how many businesses were involved in that process. We set up a process jointly with our colleagues in council tax to pick up on the somewhere in the region of 1,600 businesses which we thought were going to be eligible or possibly eligible. We set up a process of contacting all of those businesses. Some businesses didn't have correct details with the council tax department. They'd changed their names, changed their email addresses, changed their telephone numbers. We made sure that very early on in the process we had a website contact that they could get in. They had all the details, the telephone numbers of all the staff, both in council tax and regeneration, who they could contact. In respect of one of the issues Councillor Rollins has talked about, that is a situation where we had an email box set up specifically for the purpose of dealing with incoming messages. That email box was set up, I think it was one of the biggest email boxes the council had at the time. Unfortunately, it became overloaded within a day, and there was a weekend, a Friday, where the email box stopped taking messages because it was overloaded. What we tried to do with colleagues in ICT was to make sure we tried to find all the emails that bounced back to people. People who would have sent emails in would have had messages saying the box was overloaded, but we tried to contact everyone involved. And specifically, I think I know the business which Councillor Rollins is talking about. I can assure you we've been in contact with him and remain in contact with him for many months. Unfortunately, if it's the one I'm thinking about, he didn't qualify for a grant, but ultimately I'm not going to talk specifically about the individual grants. But we have had a very low number of complaints. Mostly unfortunately from people, and I do understand this, from people who haven't been eligible for the grants. And obviously, you know, it must be galling if you are a business who is next door to another business that's got a grant and for some reason you're not eligible. And of course, the eligibility criteria were not set by the council. That was set by Welsh Government, and we have tried to work with the guidance we received and to try and obtain further guidance where, as and when necessary. So I have to say, I do not agree with what Councillor Rollins said. There have been one or two businesses, and they are a very low number, which have been unfortunately haven't received the grants that maybe they thought they were due. As far as we're concerned, we've tried to contact everyone as well. Everyone has received a grant who's due a grant, and we've worked with everyone to ensure that that's happened. And I don't agree that people weren't being contacted. We try to get as many messages out there to people as possible to say that there had been this problem with the email box and to recontact us if they felt they were affected.
Thank you, Marcus.
Just to say, I'm more than happy to speak to Marcus in relation to the businesses that have contacted me. You know, there has been a number of businesses who are still waiting and haven't had a response. So I'm happy outside of the meeting to discuss with Marcus of all the cases.
Please send it on, because I'd rather you do it directly.
I think that'd be more appropriate. Councillor Burnett, did you want to add anything to that?
I think Marcus has answered it ably, but what I would say is we are fortunate as councillors. We actually have the direct emails of officers. If there had been an issue at any time during the process, and actually the Economic Resilience Fund grants have finished now, so I hope there aren't any that are still waiting to be passed on. But if there are any, then the team are totally available and happy to help.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Burnett. I'll move on to the next speaker now, which is Councillor Ruba Savignan.
Hello, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Ruba.
So firstly, I just, to reiterate already the huge thanks to, all of you and all your staff. It's been absolutely tremendous. And I don't know, Chair, if we can somehow, record or have a motion which expresses, this committee's thanks to all the staff, and our officers here today. So I have a question and a plea, I suppose. So my first question is to Emma, and poor Emma has had loads of questions and queries from me all through lockdown. Emma, you mentioned the the increasing of the black bags for people, during lockdown and at this time, and it looks like we will be going into another lockdown of sorts or restrictions. So I was just really wondering what the environmental as well as financial impact will be on us as a council, because obviously all our recycling we're moving to the separating out in Penarth, and I know you have already in other parts of the Vale, but in Penarth we're moving into that next year. So I'm just wondering, sort of the increase in what is the environmental impact and financial impact of that on us. And then my second point, Chair, if I may, and I know I've had this conversation with Marcus via email, really about the town centres. I suppose I'm really, I speak to businesses in Penarth, and in particular around the hospitality. And I suppose my concern is for the hospitality, in particular at this time, is for the hospitality sector, which and I know all the work we as a council have done to facilitate with licences and so on those businesses to keep going. But I suppose Penarth Town Council did their survey, and there was a lot of support for some kind of sort of not semi-permanent, but some kind of enabling of businesses to run through the colder months outside. This is hospitality businesses now, because some of those businesses I do fear that don't have sort of any back kind of beer garden type spaces are really going to suffer. So I suppose it's a plea that conversation can continue really about what and I realise the what are they called, Libric, whatever they're called, who are coming in to help. So I kind of hope that will be part of their focus, I guess. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ruba. Emma, did you want to just respond to the first part of Ruba's question?
Yeah, so obviously as I mentioned, we've had the increase in black bags, but Miles also mentioned that we've also managed to achieve 70% recycling in the first quarter. So that's actually quite an achievement. What we found is that we have had more black bag waste, obviously, and that is up, but we've also had lots more composting waste and lots more recycling waste. So that is why we're still able to achieve the 70%. In terms of the environmental impacts, most people have been pretty good and are still only putting 2 or 3 bags out. There's not many people actually putting 4 bags out. So although we've made that provision, lots of our customers are trying to stay to that 2-bag limit, which is really, really gratefully received. In terms of the rollout, as you may well know, we're due to go out to Barry 19th of October. I'm just looking for some confirmation from Miles now because I can't remember the date, but 19th of October to source segregated. We're obviously doing our communications campaign for that. It's been well received, and then we'll be going out to Penarth later as the next phase. The dates and everything are to be confirmed. But for me, I think that 70% figure is the teller. We've had more waste, but we're still managing to hit what is the national target for 2024-25. So I think we do need to congratulate ourselves on that. When other councils, not to be mentioned here tonight, when other councils haven't done as well as what we've done. In fact, some councils actually have sent some of their recycling to be disposed of, shall we say, rather than recycled, and we haven't done that. We've maintained it through. So I think our environmental impact on this one is good. Okay, I don't know if Matt wants to say anything on cost. I don't want to, because the cost for the waste services is very, very, very challenging.
Yeah. Okay, Matt, did you want to add anything in?
Yeah, with regard to costs, we'll come on to it later, but the actual disposal of black bag waste, actually treating it, is actually cheaper at the moment than we pay for treating our commingled recycling. So in a way there, we maybe saved a little bit of money. The main increase in cost is obviously collecting the all the waste and all the recycling, and having additional staff due to social distancing measures, and we had pool cars driving behind the refuse vehicles to ensure that. So there's been a lot of additional cost in that. However, majority of that has been claimed back from Welsh Government. The only thing we couldn't claim back was the 10% additional payments we gave to waste frontline staff, because that was a local decision. Welsh Government wouldn't fund that, but yeah, the majority of the increase in cost has been funded. Saying that, the waste budgets are still under huge pressure, and obviously that's one of the main reasons why we're changing all our services to source separated, to get the best possible price we can for our material.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Yeah, Marcus, did you want to respond to the second part, or Ruba's second question?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to respond around that Roberts Limbrick, who are doing the work, yes, they are. You know, everything is on the table. It's probably important to note that the way they're doing the work, we have a sum of money which has to be spent this financial year, and then obviously we've asked them to look at perhaps more longer term recovery measures which go beyond that. So they will separate the work they're doing into sort of immediate actions which can be undertaken and funded this financial year, and then perhaps more longer term actions which we will need to look at going forward. But certainly in terms of the funding that's available, you know, we will look to support businesses as well, and as much as we can in terms of what can be made available, and you know, nothing's off the table in that regard. But it will be a process that needs to go run its course, and we will be acting on what advice we get from Roberts Limbrick.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. We did lose Ruba for part of that, but I think she's back with us now, so which is great. Okay, I'll hand over now to Councillor Stefan William, who's been waiting patiently. Okay, Stefan.
Thank you, Chair. To be honest, my questions were relating to the previous issue, and I think you're quite right. It is a corporate resources issue regarding the IT. That was really what I was going to ask about. But regarding this, it just gives me one little opportunity to say thank you to all the officers. In the last 6 months, I've had to deal with an awful lot of issues, and they've been on hand. I've been getting phone calls from officers on the weekends and everything. It's been really good. Yeah, I've since last night handed my upgraded laptop back in. Hopefully they'll be able to iron out all the bugs that are still present. But otherwise, a big thank you from me.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Right, last question I've got is from Councillor Michael Morgan. Are you with us, Michael?
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Good. No, it's only returning to the presentation and to thank everybody that contributed to that this evening, and also to echo the other thanks to the officers who've kept the council going with emergency powers over the past few months, doing it very well without the scrutiny of us councillors, if you like. But it just occurred to me, we went into emergency powers because we weren't tooled up to run the council. Are we satisfied now that we so readily embrace this new technology that if there is another lockdown, that the council can continue business as usual without resorting to emergency powers again? That's my question.
Oh, that's a very pertinent question.
I can give you an answer if you want.
If you could, Neil. Sorry, I didn't know if you were actually still there. So yeah, that would be good if you could, please.
The truth of the matter is probably not. It depends on the severity, because what happened when we were in lockdown, things were happening at such a pace that we had no option but to take immediate decisions. And that's the reason why the emergency powers were put in place, because things had to be done, not today, not tomorrow, not next week, not allowed to go through a cabinet process and then have a call-in procedure. We would have had to use 14.14.2. Instead, we used emergency powers because they have to be done there and then. And I don't know if Miles or Marcus wants to come in, because I think that was the reality. Things were happening and they had to be done there and then.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Marcus or Miles, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to say, essentially, it's about leadership, and it was very much a command and control model when you're in an emergency situation. If we had time to make the decisions, we will take them through the new online processes with members. But as the leader says, some of these decisions are made in matters of hours. And I just assure members that we always took the decisions in the best interests of our residents. But we treated this, we have winter maintenance disasters, with bad weather, we have flooding, and we use this sort of command and control arrangement during those times, and it's necessity, essentially. We were certainly not looking to not involve members in any decisions, and if we had time, if we get a second wave, we will do that, but we still need to reserve the right to make those really quick judgments because of the nature of the situation we're in.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you, Miles.
Chair, I just add that's exactly what Miles has said, but obviously even with regard to the grant funding, that money arrived overnight and we had to set up a process to deliver it, and we were expected to get a certain, I think we got about £5 million out in the first week, so we just didn't have time, but obviously we made sure that members were fully informed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've had a really good and long discussion around which I think was very pertinent to do around our recovery, and obviously there's huge challenges still going ahead and going forward, and at the moment we don't know if we're facing another local lockdown, national lockdown. It's all a very movable feast, but I think everybody will agree, for us as a committee to put on record our thanks for all the staff, whether they're frontline officers, directors, the chief executive. I think everybody, the dedication to the council and to keep our services running, and to actually look after some of our most vulnerable people, whether they're in businesses or whether in social services, our children. I think everybody's done a fantastic job, and circumstances that were completely thrown at everybody and with no experience. I never thought I'd ever see this situation in my lifetime. So I think they've done an incredible job. And there have been challenges, and not everything has been perfect, and there's often been plan Bs, plan Cs, but I think that's how you evolve and you make sure that you're improving, you're taking on board what you're trying to do and what you're actually trying to achieve. So I think as a committee, I would really like to put on record our thanks to everybody. And I think everybody would be happy to agree to that. Okay, time is moving on.
Bronwyn, sorry, can I just make a statement here? Because
yes, you can. Yes.
Today, right? I've been a councillor on this and the subsequent councillors for 32 years. I have never ever experienced anything like this in my life. And I've been working in local government and central government all of my life, and this has been, I have to say, the most horrendous period in anybody's period. I have to say that our officers are superb. They have not only come up to the best standard, they have gone far beyond what you would have expected of them. And things have to be done now, and believe it or not, they were. I've never experienced anything like my life, and I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone.
Oh, thank you, Neil. I think that's it's very relevant indeed. So I'd like to thank everybody for their input into our discussions. I'd like to thank the officers for their presentation. And I'd like to thank our leader and the cabinet, because they still kept meeting when remote meetings were actually totally in their infancy. So, and they made some really huge and big and important decisions that they had to make sometimes at the drop of a hat. So I'd like to record my thanks for that as well. Right, we're going to move on. The time is moving on at the moment. And we're going to move on to item number 6, which is the annual delivery plan monitoring report, quarter 1 performance 2020 to 2021. Sorry, I think Miles, I think you're going to take this. Am I right?
Yes, Chair. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I'll hand it to you then.
A lot of information here, Chair. I'll try and make it as sensible as I can, because it's a lot of information. So essentially, this is the first quarter monitoring plan for the annual delivery plan. So in a nutshell, we measure ourselves on a range of actions and key performance indicators. So these are featured in a new corporate plan, which was new from the 1st of April this year. And I'm pleased to advise that despite the many challenges over this quarter, we are showing an amber position. So that shows that a lot of our actions are completed, as are the achievement of a lot of our key performance indicators. But I also need to apologise, Chair, because this is the full council's position. So essentially what this does is cover every one of the new 4 wellbeing objectives for the corporate plan. And Appendix 1 and 2 of this rather large document shows our performance against the key performance indicators and the actions. And in the right-hand column of that Appendix 1 and 2, you'll see the relevant scrutiny committee. So if you could bear with us on this one, what we're hoping to do, and we will do for the next meeting of scrutiny, is have a much more focused presentation based on the remits of the particular scrutiny committee that we're presenting to. So I presented this to the Homes and Safe Communities committee last week, and I said the same. So the remit of your committee clearly is quite precise. So this is the overall council's position, because most of all of our objectives are cross-cutting. What we will do for the next cycle is we'll supplement this report with a specific presentation to this committee on the items that are within your remit, so that you can challenge us on those items, or any others you wish, but certainly on those specifically. So as I say, very detailed document. Essentially, the annual delivery plan ensures our compliance with 2 pieces of legislation that govern us as a council: the Local Government Wales measure and the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. So all our wellbeing objectives are aimed at achieving those 2 pieces of legislation. We have a very strong central governance team. So this is our new performance management framework, essentially. As before, each directorate head has a service plan, which is, if you like, a mini business plan. And that business plan then feeds into the corporate plan, which is, as I say, new from the 1st of April. So this is our performance. I won't go into massive detail. I'll let members ask questions should they wish, but this is our performance of the first quarter, which, as I say, is amber. So considering all the things we've been through, I think that's pretty good. And as I say, for your next meeting, we'll ensure that you have a presentation which is bespoke to your committee and deals with the issues that are within your remit specifically. But you can also ask questions on any item within this document. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Miles. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge report. I know we had it at Homes and Safer Communities, and so no, I think it's. I look forward to actually seeing that, as I say, when it actually hones in on what is relevant for our committee, and it'd be good to actually see a presentation around that. I do have Councillor Rollins. You wanted to ask a question around this?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. It's well, I imagine it's for Emma, really. It wouldn't be scrutiny if I didn't ask Emma a question. So it's page 56, Emma, and it's ADP 40, transport interchange to Barry Docks. I just want to ask more information about that, to be honest.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and it wouldn't be Scrutiny, and I have missed Scrutiny. I've missed it a lot, so it's nice to be back. Yeah, the Barry Docks interchange. We're looking at currently doing a well tag, which, as you know, we've done well tag for lots of transport projects, and the well tag we're looking at doing is looking at the possibility of a transport interchange, which would comprise essentially of potentially a new relocated bus station at or around the sites of the dock offices. So that work at the moment is being looked at to see whether that would be feasible and where that might be feasible. And in conjunction with Marcus's team, we're also looking at the commercial prospects for those areas as well. So it's not just about transport, it's also about looking at potential transport and regeneration and commercial opportunity scheme. So I would hope that we would be back at Cabinet probably, we're expecting a draft report November time, so I would hope we would be at Cabinet and into some form of consultation on those proposals the back end of this year, the start of next year. But really exciting, lots of opportunities, because obviously COVID has changed the way people are travelling, it has changed the use of office accommodation, and it does offer us some potentials to get a relocated a new bus station and associated infrastructure located to the waterfront side of Barry. So hopefully later part of this year, start of next.
Can I just follow up? It's a point of clarification, but more that Chair. It said the scheme is not considered to be deliverable sustainable transport links to the airport. But the actual title says more sustainable transport links to the airport. Slightly confused.
Right. Right. So no, there is another scheme that looks at that. So no, this scheme is about providing a better interchange facility. It would be for sustainable transport, so it could be for electric cars, electric bikes, normal bikes, buses, taxis, you name it, any mode of transport that you can think of, it would be for. But it's not specifically for anything directly to the airport. There is other schemes in there that are, but that's not them.
Right, because that's very, very confusing. So just to point that out.
Okay.
Okay. All right. I'll bring in Councillor Andy Robertson now, or Robinson. Sorry, Andy. I'm not sure if we lost contact with you earlier. I'm not sure. Are you there, Andy?
I'm here. I'm loud. Hear you loud and clear. And you were right first time. It's Robertson.
Robertson, sorry.
Not Robinson.
Sorry
like I said last time. Like I said last time. Think marmalade, not barley water. Right. I've got a couple of questions on agenda item 6. The first thing I want to know is who has responsibility for assigning the red, amber, green symbols to the corporate plan implementation? Second question I have is on page 8. Are there any figures available for the number of staff who have actually had COVID? Next question, page 10, relating to the pupils on EOTS. Weren't all the pupils in the Vale of Glamorgan EOTAS between March and September? Next question, page 12. Is the airport likely to survive this pandemic? On page 15, does the Windsor Road Clathie Street cycleway still stop at the railway bridge? I've spoken to a number of people in Penarth who are unhappy about spending a lot of money on a scheme which doesn't actually sort of seem to go anywhere. Page 19, do we have any record of how many hits there were on the Vale of Glamorgan social media posts? Page 25, I note that 86% of staff would like to continue working from home. Is this feasible? And on page 27, isn't the landmass flood prevention scheme an NRW responsibility? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andy. You've been quiet all meeting. Now you're on list. That's fine.
I've been saving it up.
Okay, I'm not sure who's going to answer or who's going to start with those, Miles or Emma.
I was frantically trying to write them down as Councillor Robertson was speaking. In terms of the red, amber, green, I think that was the first question. We as officers work with our performance and development team, and we have to show them evidence. So we provide reports every quarter to them. Now, bear in mind, they've got to be capable of being audited externally as well. So we provide them evidence in terms of our performance to that period, and then they assign, and they're quite strict actually, they normally assign a stricter measure than we would have signed ourselves. And then we challenge them if necessary. But if members wish to challenge any of those marks, they can do the same. So it's a joint effort between the governance team who works for Rob Thomas and the heads of service and directorates from the actual directorates who are responsible for that. Then we've got how many COVID cases we've had. I'd have to come back to that. We do have that information, Councillor Robertson, but I would have to defer to my colleague Tracy Dickinson to provide you that and the committee possibly in writing. We do hold that information, but it's not an area that I've got full detail on for this meeting. How am I doing? I got the first two correct, I think. And the pupils on EOTS, I'm not sure if there's anyone better to answer that question than me. I take your point, they weren't in school during that period. Councillor Burnett has a hand up.
EOTS is educated other than at school. It's a specific designation for children. We have targets for it and we're measured. I think to add in every single school child might render those measures unworkable. So, but I'm sure that the education team could provide you a full answer on that.
Okay, is the airport likely to survive the pandemic? I have no idea. Sorry about that. You probably have to put that question. Marcus, do you have a better idea than I do?
I don't have a better idea. I think it's fair to say that we remain in discussions with the airport and have continued the regular meetings we have with them around some of the economic development areas and also some of the routes they've been developing. Clearly, you know, if you're in the airport business now, it's not a very good time to be in it. But I think, to be fair to Cardiff, they have delivered through the pandemic themselves in terms of ensuring flights for PPE came in. So unfortunately, Councillor Robertson, I can't actually answer that, but I think it's probably got as good a chance as any other regional airport of surviving.
And the next question was in relation to Windsor Road, Plassey Street cycleway. I'm not sure whether Emma is able to comment on that.
No, I'd have to come back on that. The question was around people have asked for the extension of that. Was that right, Councillor Robertson?
Yeah, I think that's when we saw the plans for the scheme, and I think it used quite a lot of 106 money. It seemed that the cycleway came down from Plassey Street area, hit the Brains Railway Bridge and stopped, which doesn't seem very helpful as a cycleway.
Yeah, so there's a good bit of news on that. We're about to start our work on our active travel maps, so our network review maps of cycling and walking, and they're going to be reviewed. So those sorts of missing links are going to be important to be identified through that actual process. So we will have a chance to pick those up, and if residents feel that that link is important, or there are other links that are important, they can come through this process, and we can then, as a council, put together a comprehensive map of network map of cycling and walking opportunities.
Okay.
Thank you, Emma.
I think the next point was in terms of people working from home, and this was a combination. So 54% of the employees asked said they wanted to work from a combination of work and home. and then there was 32% that said they would be happy to work from home all the time. So I can say fairly confidently that we'll be able to get the combination. Whether we have that number working from home, my guess is probably more, but it will be business related. So we've asked ourselves the question, are you able to work from home 100%? Are you able to work from home for a proportion? And we're basing then the amount of time that people spend in the office on that answer. So it has to be business led. So the fact they'd like to work from home doesn't really come into it, I have to say. The first question is, can the business support that activity from home? At the moment, we're encouraging the home working, but without COVID, again, we'd ask ourselves the same question. Is it in the business's interest for you to work from home? So some people will be disappointed, and some people maybe not so, but it's a business issue. We wouldn't let people work from home just because they wanted to do that. It might not be in the interest of the business. The last issue then.
Can I come back on that, Chair?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Cameron, sorry.
Yeah.
No, just go back on that. We have missed out the one point, but does this, if a large number of the council's office staff particularly should decide that they want to work from home and are allowed to work from home, doesn't this mean that the council building will be rather unpopulated?
Yeah, I think I said when I was doing the initial preamble for this recovery, one of the things that we are looking at is whether this new way of working frees off office space. So it's a bit early to say, but clearly we wouldn't want staff rattling around in a very big building. Doesn't make sense. But we've got the Alps, we've got Court Road, we've got the docks, and we've got the Civic. So there may be a possibility of rationalising some of that office space when we actually get the final working from home, working from the workplace model. So we certainly would not be operating with empty office space. It's just not viable to do that. But it's really too early to say in terms of how this will pan out. But there's definitely going to be a situation where more staff are working from home than had been the case previously. And the last point was
thanks, Miles.
Sorry, Councillor.
Social media.
There's one that's missed out. The council in that document, it says that the council has done a lot of work to communicate with the broader wider public, with the electorate effectively, and they put up 178 social media posts. Do you have any figures on how many hits you had on those social media posts? You know, how well are we getting the message out?
We have very accurate figures. I just don't have them to hand, but I can send them to you tomorrow and to all members of this committee.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, I can bring in Councillor Vince Bailey.
Hang on. Sorry, Chair.
Andy, I thought you'd finished.
Oh, I have finished. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the landmice flood prevention scheme.
Landmice. Sorry, Chair.
Why is that in NRW?
Yeah, it's not a main river scheme, Chair, because it's overland flooding. So it's a scheme that is the council's to resolve. So we are getting close to final design on that, and we are still hopeful that we will be on site this financial year. Things like this have been delayed, unfortunately, because of the COVID arrangement, and we've got discussions with landowners to do, and this has actually caused us some delay in doing that. But it's our scheme because it's not essentially river flooding.
Thank you very much for all those answers, Miles. Excellent, every one of them. And I'd like to say I want to join in the love fest and say how brilliantly the council's done, the officers of the council. You've been fantastic. Well done.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. I'll make sure that message is passed on. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll bring in Councillor Vince Bailey now.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick one in relation to, I think it's on page 8, and the car parking issues, the TROs specifically. I appreciate this was a decision that was taken back in March, but when the TROs, when that was sort of brought back to life early on in COVID, I know that did cause some worry and concern. I just wonder, given the context of everything around COVID, the financial challenges not just faced by the council but by individual residents, do you think that we ought to be knocking this on the head for a while and giving people something less to be worried about, and trying to charge for car parking at a time when shops might not even be open. Like, even having it part of the conversation now seems to be an unwelcome and unhelpful distraction. That was my question.
Right, I think there was a lot of miscommunication when that did come out. Miles, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, Chair. The council took a decision to actually charge for car parking. So we had a legal process to follow, which we have done. We would have been able to actually put the charges in had there been no objections, because Councillor King has delegated authority for that. But there have been a number of objections. So we'll provide that report to Cabinet in the next 4 weeks, and Cabinet will take a decision in on the future as regards car parking.
Okay, thank you, Miles. Right, we've got the report there. So as Miles stated at the beginning of this will be coming back to us in a sort of format that's actually relevant then, and that we can hone in on that was relevant for our committee. So we'll be happy to accept that report as it is at the moment, and then look forward to it coming back then at a future meeting. Is that okay? Yeah. Right, so moving on to item number 7 then, which is the revenue and capital monitoring for the period 1st of April to 31st of July. Are you taking this, Matthew, or no? I'm not sure who's taking it.
Yes, I am. Sorry.
Sorry, I think.
Yes,
okay,
thank you, Chair. Sorry, I took my camera off then instead of unmuting myself. Yeah, sorry. So it's the report for April to July for both revenue and capital monitoring. Just to quickly say, the budget for neighbourhood services and transport was increased by 1.25 million in this financial year. So we haven't got the same level of pressures we had previous years, but there are still pressures on the budget. And the overall budget for this committee is currently projected to outturn on budget. However, we will require the use of reserves again this year, but not, well, hopefully not to the same level as last year. For neighbourhood services and transport, we're currently projecting that we'll need 600,000 from reserve. And for building cleaning, building maintenance and building cleaning, currently 515,000. However, I'll go on to it in a minute. That could possibly increase. So yeah, start with neighbourhood services. The main pressures on the budget continue to be the waste collection service. So as we mentioned earlier, we've got additional staffing, and although that has been covered by Welsh Government grant, we've got the 10% uplift in salary given to frontline staff. This costs us around 175,000, so that will be funded from reserves. Still ongoing pressure on our recycling treatment budget as well. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the treatment of our commingled recycling is actually now our most expensive treatment. You know, it's actually cheaper to send our refuse to energy from waste than is treat our recycling at the moment. So that's the reason why we're rolling out this source separated service. But obviously, in the meantime, we are still paying a high price for our commingled recycling. Other pressures on the budget. We've had other pressures such as car parking. When we were closing our car parks, obviously you have no income coming in. Commercial waste service has reduced. Obviously leisure centres being closed put pressure on our contractor, and we've had to make additional payments to our contractor to obviously subsidise them during the closure period. Enforcement income, things like that. However, a lot of those have been funded from the Welsh Government grant, and we anticipate that that will hopefully continue until at least the end of the financial year. Obviously, if at some point that Welsh Government remove that grant, then we'll have additional budget pressures. So, but we'll notify committee of that in future. Building services. So that the main budget pressure within building services is the building maintenance section. Obviously, when there's the start of the pandemic, most of their work dried up overnight. So obviously, the majority of the work is repairs in council houses and our offices, so all our public buildings, schools, etc. And due to a lot of those buildings either closing or with council houses, tradesmen not being able to go in to do routine repairs, just going in to do emergency work. A lot of their work dried up overnight, so their loss of income has been about £25,000 a week. However, we still had the majority of the costs of the service, paying the staff, etc., our vehicles. I know a lot of those staff were repurposed to other areas within the council to help out during the pandemic, but obviously it has caused a budget pressure for the building maintenance service, and that the figure of 515,000 currently could get worse until we sort of get back up to sort of running as close to normal as we were prior to the pandemic. Obviously, a further lockdown over a couple of months could set us backwards, and just revert to doing emergency repairs and things like that. So again, we'll have to monitor that closely. The building cleaning service, not as much pressure on this service, as we've got a lot of SLA agreements with the schools and things like that. And hopefully we'll still be able to charge them for the cleaning service, and maybe even increase income as cleaning programs are increased over the future months. Staff in this area were also given a bonus payment of 10%, which works out about £65,000 over the period April to August. But this again will be funded from reserves. I'll then go on to mention savings for this year. So they're shown at Appendix 1 to the report. And for this year, they're only 83,000, so a lot less than we've had to save in previous years. And that was obviously intentional due to the budget pressures that services were under, and it would have been difficult to make further savings. So it's 83,000 at the moment. We're projecting we're going to make those savings. I then go on to mention capital, and I apologise. There's quite a few schemes, so I'll quickly mention each one in case people have questions on them later. And I'll mention the changes in the budgets. So Penarth Heights is an increase in the 2021 capital budget of 25,000 to install the remaining docking stations for the next bikes that have been installed. Next scheme, Nordale Road, Bedford Rise Bridge Lighting Scheme. Again, 25,000 from Section 106 funding for that scheme. So the capital programme's been increased for that. Another Section 106 scheme, upgrade of CCTV systems. So looking at systems in Roos and also in Ogmore, due to obviously issues, antisocial behaviour issues in those areas earlier in the year. Next scheme, local sustainable transport COVID response. So we've been awarded 221,000 from the Welsh Government to try and progress sustainable transport schemes. The next one, M4's Cardiff Airport Transport Network Scheme. So this is ongoing. Obviously, previous WellTag studies have been undertaken for this scheme, and we've got 500,000 grant funding for this year to carry on those studies and looking for a solution there. We've had 180,000 grant for electronic bus stop information displays, so to upgrade displays in our bus stops. And we've also had 100,000 to upgrade bus stops along our strategic routes. Next scheme, St Athan Active Travel Route Design. So we've been awarded 44,000 grant to fund the design of this scheme. And further active travel fund as well, core active travel fund. We've had 410,000. I think Emma mentioned earlier we're looking at the active travel maps, and yeah, we've got 410,000 grant funding to increase levels of active travel. The next one, small scale works grant. This is actually for flood management schemes, and there's, I think it's 3 schemes mentioned in the report. We've got 84,000 Welsh Government grant for that, for those schemes, and we're matching that with 15,000 match funding from our own capital budgets. The next one, street lighting energy reduction strategy. We've increased the capital budget by just over 1.9 million to obviously roll out further LED lighting, and this is to be funded from an interest-free loan from Salix Finance and repaid over the future years. And the programme for that installation of that scheme is now being extended to the end of the calendar year due to the pandemic. Next one, coast protection and land drainage. Contracts been awarded for surface water sewer relining work at North Esplanade Penarth. Next one, replacement variable message signs. So this budget of 16,000 is no longer required, and that has been moved to a budget for Bay 5 works. So that's the cafe over Barry Island, Bay 5. Next one, replacement of pay and display machines. Originally we had a capital budget of 99,000 to replace machines where we currently charge at Barry Island and Ogmore. However, that budget has been increased by 158,000 to include the machines required for town centre and country parks going forward. St Athan's sustainable transport improvements, 143,000 of Section 106 funding. So that is to actually undertake the work. So I mentioned earlier we had grants to fund the design. We've actually got money to undertake the works as well. The next one, vehicle renewal fund.
Sorry, Matthew, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. I don't think we actually need to go through every line.
Okay.
There's a lot in that report. I
know, yes.
And I think everybody's had a chance to read it. So I just wonder if there were any sort of questions around, or if there were any particular highlights that you had, instead of sort of having to sort of go through it all. I think. Yeah,
no problems. No, I think say the rest, the schemes that are there for everyone to see. So, yeah, if there's any questions, I'll take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Has anybody got any questions, or are we happy? Obviously, it's in the first quarter of the year, and obviously the pandemic is still having an impact on picking things up. So do we have any questions, or are we happy to accept this report? Yeah, I think we're all happy with that, and there's a lot of detail in that report. So thank you, Matthew, for that. Okay. And obviously, as I say, it's the first quarter anyway at the moment. But it's good to see as well that your cost pressures are a lot less this year. So thank you for that. So if we're happy to agree that report, I'll move on to item number 8 then, which is the last one, and it's over to you, Gareth, which is the updated work programme schedule.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to quickly highlight that normally we'll be taking decision tracking with the work programme, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been a lot of reports, so we'll try and provide decision tracking the next meeting. So if I can focus on Appendix A, which is the new cabinet new forward work programme. As you can see, it's a new format. It's in line with cabinet, so it mirrors the cabinet forward work programme format. There's more information on the purpose and impact of each report, so hence the reason why it's now 19 pages as opposed to 2 or 3 pages that we previously had. So there's a lot more detail there for members of the committee and for members of the public. So I'm just basically asking members to accept the report, and bear in mind that there are likely to be changes as the COVID-19 pandemic carries on, and ask members to accept the work programme and for it to be uploaded to the council website. I'm happy to take any comments. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, are we happy to accept the work programme? Yeah, I think we all are, so thank you for that. So that's the end of the meeting. We've got no other business. I'd just like to say thank you to everybody. Obviously, this is the first meeting. It's all new territory for us. And so I'd just like to thank everybody for their patience tonight and their contributions to the discussions as well. So I think we've had some good discussions. So I'd just like to thank everybody for attending the meeting and persevering with me as well as Chair, because I do feel it's a bit like the Eurovision Song Contest at the moment, checking if everybody's there, not asking for your scores. But so thank you everybody. Thank you to Gareth for sorting all that side of it out, and thank you to our officers as well for coming along, and to Councillor Burnett and Peter King as well. So thank you everybody.
Said thanks, couldn't you, Chair?
Sorry?
You could have said thanks, couldn't you?
Well, I could have, couldn't I, Stefan? I thought, well, I'll just give a quick thanks. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. And
I'd like to welcome the new member of the committee sitting on Vince's lap.
I have to say, Vince is a vast improvement. Sorry about that.